Just as everyone is joining the call, welcome to everybody who's joining us today. Thank you so much for coming along. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the call. If you have any questions, please chuck them into the Q&A panel that should be available to all attendees, and we will answer those when we get to the correct section. So without further ado, we might kick off. So today's webinar, Understanding Performance Management from Compliance to Productivity. What we're going to do today is we are joined by Steve Forster, who is our employment law expert here at Xemplo. Welcome, Steve.
That's right.
Hi, my name's Rihanna Verka, and I'm from our HR product team. And so today we're going to be talking about, we have launched a new Xemplo performance product, and we are going to be talking about essentially the motivation for that performance product, and a little bit about how we perceive the Xemplo tools can support businesses to manage performance. Not only from a productivity perspective, but also keeping compliance front and center, which is what we're always aiming for with Xemplo. So throughout the session today, we're going to be getting Steve's insights into what a compliance performance program, compliance-driven performance program looks like. Thank you, Steve. We'll also be doing a demonstration of the new Xemplo performance product as well. And we're going to discover a bunch of other practical ways to track performance and sort of keep documentation in Xemplo as well. So performance management isn't just about annual reviews. It's about meeting compliance obligations. Was definitely one of the core motivations we started out with when we started building the performance product. How we can help our customers to protect their businesses as well as improve productivity. That is generally the focus of a lot of performance tools, actually, is they sort of lean towards being productivity and resource utilization and talent profiling tools. So today we're going to explore not only those parts, but we're going to focus a little bit more heavily on compliance, which is quite often kind of the part of performance that gets less emphasis. So Steve and I actually have had this conversation earlier. So this is the part where I'll start drawing from Steve's expertise, the differences between what I commonly refer to as performance monitoring versus performance management. So we'll define performance monitoring for the purposes of today's discussion as performance monitoring is essentially understanding somebody's performance while they're in a specific role for the purposes of understanding whether they are performing as productively as you would like them to, versus performance management is understanding somebody's fit for their role, whether they're performing the job that you expect them to perform, and whether you're keeping enough documentation that you're able to sort of prove that you have kept somebody on track with the role that they're expected to do. Did I get it right, Steve? Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, awesome. So exploring that then, why would you consider performance management to be a compliance issue then? Let's jump into the performance management part of it.
Sure. I think if I step back and pick up on the comments that you were just making, Ray, performance management itself is something of a maligned concept because for, I think, a lot of people, it tends to conjure images of trying to manage someone out of a business, but there's so much more to it than that. I think when it's working well, performance management is all about clarity. And so by that, I mean making sure both sides understand what success looks like in a role. So associated with that, I see it as being all about transparency, supporting an individual and creating a fair and accountable, and I want to emphasise this quite a lot throughout the discussion, a consistent environment in which performance is looked at. That said, I can't sit here and say that it isn't about protecting the business too. Managing performance isn't just about productivity or HR. It also does cut across contract law and workplace safety and employment legislation obligations. So it's in that realm where if performance management is done correctly, if it's tied to specific and measurable tasks in the role description, then it almost becomes a compliance safeguard. So to round out that sort of preliminary thought, I guess, is that when you strip away all of the myths, performance management is a proactive tool for engagement, safety and compliance, not just a disciplinary or productivity process. And from a legal perspective, it can make all the difference. If it helps, so I can unpack sort of what are some of the traditional and some of the more kind of nuanced. That would be wonderful,
actually. Let's group them that way. Let's go for the traditional kind of legal compliance reasons for performance management, and then we'll explore some of the newer ones.
Sounds like a plan. I think, look, the first and most obvious compliance issue related to performance management is its relationship with unfair dismissal. In Australia, most of our people tuning in today will be aware that employees are protected from unfair dismissal if they've served for 6 months, or in the case of a small business employer, for 12 months. There's only an increasingly, I would say, diminishing number of high-income employees who are not covered by a modern award or an enterprise agreement who don't have that protection. So what does all of this mean? Look, anyone who is protected from unfair dismissal and who is dismissed for poor performance can bring a claim to the Fair Work Commission, arguing that the dismissal was harsh, unjust, or unreasonable. And if they succeed in that application, they can receive a remedy. It could be reinstatement with back pay, or it could be 6 months of compensation. So we're talking fairly high stakes, and where the rubber hits the road is when considering if a dismissal was unfair or not. The Fair Work Commission is required to determine various things, including whether the performance was objectively bad, as you say and rely on, whether the employee knew about that performance concern and had a chance to respond or improve, and whether they received warnings about that performance. If you can't demonstrate those things through evidence, then you're going to have a very difficult time disproving that the dismissal was unfair or proving that it was fair. So although I can't say, Ray, anywhere in the Fair Work Act, hey, this is where it says that you must follow a performance management process, the way that the unfair dismissal regime is set up is, I think you can almost describe it as a de facto compliance obligation. If you don't do it, you're going to get caught. I think just to round out a couple of the more traditional sort of well-known compliance risks associated with this, one is compliance with policy. Most employers have a policy that says they will monitor and review performance and make decisions based on objective criteria and assessment. Any failure to abide by that policy is going to increase the risk of a successful unfair dismissal claim that we've just talked about. And in some cases, it can even support other types of claims like breach of contract, or increase the chances of things like a psychological injury claim or a bullying claim. It's worth adding to that even if you do follow the policy, you've got to be able to evidence that you did that. This will come to show today. That's why.
Not just about having the document, then you actually have to do the things in the document.
That's why, Xemplo performance is such a great tool. I just touched on bullying claims and workers' compensation claims related to psychological injury, and it is something worth touching on now at the outset. It is simply a fact of employment that when employers make decisions that impact employees, that it can have an effect on employees' well-being, and they can, oftentimes very fairly, but also sometimes without good reason, make claims that they're being bullied, and employees can also develop very serious psychological injuries as a result of management action, both good and bad. Under Australian workers' comp laws, there's usually a defence where a psychological injury has arisen wholly or predominantly out of management action that was reasonable to take and carried out reasonably. The same is true for bullying claims. So what this means is that when it comes to review processes, disciplinary processes, or other management decisions, if they're handled lawfully, fairly, and respectfully, and coming back to the point you just made, and if you've got the documents to prove that that was the case, you have that statutory protection from the claims. The flip side is if you don't, then you're going to find it really hard to defend yourself as a business. I think they're the traditional risks.
And so in that case, is the onus on the employer to sort of disprove things? Because that's typical of a lot of Fair Work action, isn't it? That you're in the position of having to disprove things.
That's true. I think, and not to rely too heavily on the castle, but the Fair Work Commission has a very significant vibe to it at times. There's obviously a legal framework in which decisions need to be made, but in coming to decide whether things have occurred or not occurred as alleged, there's really what I would describe as a shifting legal onus. Whoever's saying that they did the right thing has to come along and demonstrate through evidence that they've done the right thing. So if an employer is saying in response to an unfair dismissal claim that they've acted fairly and appropriately, or if they're saying in response to a bullying or workers' comp claim that they can avail themselves of the reasonable management action carried out in a reasonable way defence, it really is going to be incumbent on the employer to bring proof that they did that.
So we talked about the traditional ones. We did actually cross over into the newer business risks, so psychosocial hazards and safety. Is there anything you want to add to those parts? So others kind of, because we tend to think about it from the perspective of education of employees, but if we say, for example, I haven't defined somebody's role that well, for example, and they end up undertaking activities for which they haven't been properly trained, etc. Does that that would naturally put a business at risk as well?
Yeah, certainly there are emerging risks around performance management that go to issues like safety and also even more kind of complex employment claims like unlawful termination.
Mm-hmm.
In the safety arena, all jurisdictions in Australia have now introduced codes of practice governing the management of psychosocial hazards. It's a hard word to say. A psychosocial hazard at work is an aspect of work or a situation that might arise at work that can cause a stress response, which in turn can lead to psychological or physical harm. And if you open up the New South Wales Code of Practice on this, for example, it lists the following types of hazards. Role overload, role underload, role conflict, lack of role clarity, low job control, poor relationships between managers and supervisors, poor decision-making processes around reviews and those sorts of things. So fairly vague type concepts that you can really only address through having detailed processes that people follow. This is critical because managing these types of hazards is mandatory now. In New South Wales, for example, Ray, only on the 25th of July this year, so very recently, it became law for employers to actually follow the contents of these codes of practice. And so if we sort of link this to the discussion that we're having about performance management now, the rubber hits the road in a couple of ways. Performance reviews and actions can without question become psychosocial hazards when they're performed poorly, haphazardly, or inconsistently. And failure to conduct or document reviews at all can also lead to kind of low role clarity and understanding. So I would say to that, strong processes around identifying key role requirements and then reviewing and monitoring performance against them is really essential to form part of that risk mitigation strategy to deal with psychosocial hazards. Before we move on from these risks, there are just a couple of unlawful termination risks I should mention. Unlawful terminations, unlike unfair dismissal, it's not about fairness, it's about why a decision was taken. And it's a claim that can be brought at any time during the employment. So if an employee is dismissed and they're dismissed for any legal reason, they can bring a claim associated with that. We touched briefly on the intersection between unlawful termination and performance management before, when we said that it's really important, because when an allegation of unlawful termination is made, in the courts especially, the onus actually does shift to the employer to prove that the decision was taken for a lawful reason. And courts are increasingly open to scrutinising what employers say about their motivation for dismissal, and looking behind that to objectively ascertain if, for example, you say it was based on poor performance, to look at whether or not that was true or not. So it just goes without saying that if you want to say that the reason was based on performance, then you better have some well-documented expectations, feedback, and measurable performance evidence there to do that. There's also now very good reason why employers need to ensure that they're managing probationary processes well too. I think a lot of employers think that probation is really just a sort of a free hit to assess employees, and if it doesn't work, you can simply let them go with no reason. That's not the case. There was a very
It's about to be my very next question.
Okay. Well, I'll let you ask. I've done too much talking.
You can let me ask. Okay. So actually, well, no, it was more. We have kind of set now that the expectation is you clearly define a role and you keep documentation throughout somebody's tenure with the business, that basically, that you can provide as evidence, or that confirms that you provided continual and frequent role clarity for an employee, and that you documented also consistently and regularly that there were discussions about feedback, and that you documented those and you keep those on file. One of the things, so that's what we need to do. One of the things I now want to do is kind of apply that across the worker life cycle, keeping in mind that there are different trigger points at which sometimes performance scrutiny is that little bit higher. We expect. I actually feel like that can be kind of dangerous thinking, though, what I just said, because there is a bit of a tendency to think about, performance scrutiny at the sort of the bookends of the life cycle. So when somebody's new, they're in probation, when's your end of employment, but there's the ongoing employment cycle in the middle, and there are expectations about performance management in each of those phases. So if we start with performance, I'll come back to now what you're about to start answering is how does compliance kind of apply to workers during the probationary period specifically? Because as you mentioned, sometimes there is a bit of a culture of it's a free-for-all during probation. I could do what I like.
Yeah, it's great observation. I think I've heard that a lot throughout my career. From a compliance point of view, there are some obvious risks with taking that approach. The first is, clearly during probation, notice of termination still applies. You must adhere to any notice requirements, and an employee can still bring an unlawful termination claim or a discrimination claim. So legally speaking, I think what this means is that an employer still has to act fairly. They have to give proper reasons for the termination and notice of termination, and where the decision is based on performance, they should ensure this is measured against objective criteria that the employee was aware of, has been discussed with them, and had the opportunity to review. I think before we leave that, it's worth noting that the opportunity in probation is not just to dismiss with lower risks. That's not its purpose. I think probation done very well should be viewed as an opportunity to really set an employee up for success. So that means, I think, clear expectations from day one. So outlining role requirements in a position description, telling an employee what their KPIs are, and setting what the business's workplace standards are, what they're going to be measured against. Throughout the period, there then needs to be regular feedback loops, so scheduled check-ins, providing constructive feedback, celebrate successes and all the rest, but do identify and address gaps early. You obviously need to document your progress reviews, because without that written record, setting out what you've said and what the agreed actions are, you get into a he said later. Hello, Xemplo performance. This is where it is really amazing. And it's a time to offer support and training. That's really critical. I could give you also just a case example of why now there is stone cold proof from the courts that you really need to be engaged in that process throughout the probationary period, and not just waiting, for example, to the last minute to say, well, we've been looking at you for 6 months, even though we haven't discussed it with you. We've decided that you're not good enough and we're going to move you on. There was a recent case called Debussy and the Australian Federation of Islamic Councils. And the background to this case is Mr. Debussy was employed as a CEO, and on the day his probation ended, at 20 minutes to 5, so a mere few hours before he would have passed his probationary period and thus become eligible to bring an unfair dismissal claim under the Fair Work Act, the company dismissed him for alleged conduct-related issues. So not performance, conduct, but still able to draw a lot of parallels. So yeah, classic 11th hour termination. Now, the legal issue that arose in the case is Mr. Debussy alleged that the timing of the dismissal appeared to be deliberate and done in order to prevent him from accessing unfair dismissal protections. He said that you've only done this and rushed it through because if you waited an extra day to really try to get to the bottom of the facts, I would have been able to bring a claim. And he said that was unlawful because as a result, the motivation was that he had workplace rights that he might exercise in the future. The court actually accepted that argument and the case is not finalised yet, but the court said that's actually a very good point. And so it has temporarily reinstated him to his employment pending the outcome of the case. So what it means, what the upshot is for performance is that, of course, employers want to give employees the full opportunity to prove themselves during the probationary period. But if you're not throughout that process clearly reviewing performance against those agreed KPIs and role tasks and documenting it, you might run into an argument that if you just wait until the last minute, that your true motivation is about actually unfair dismissal protections and nothing else. And when that happens, you could actually run into a serious compliance issue.
Yeah, no, there is a lot to learn about that one yet. So don't leave things at the last minute. Make sure that you have all the documentation and, that you have a clear narrative about what your motivation was. Thank you. So keeping those in mind, now let's move on to ongoing employment. So I think we often tend to think about performance management at the beginning of employment, as I mentioned before, it's a probationary thing, or at the end. But during employment, there are lots of triggers potentially for additional performance scrutiny, as well as you do need to be continually doing the things we talked about at the start as well, like so continually clarifying what somebody's role is, helping them to understand what the expectation of performance in that role is, and conducting regular conversations to be sure that somebody understands that and that you are getting the outcomes that you had expected. Particularly around things like change of role, for example, are there kind of things that we need to be watching out for during ongoing employment as well?
100%. I think you hit the nail on the head with your intro to that question. Performance management isn't just about the bookends of the employment. It's equally valuable throughout the employment relationship, particularly when there is role change, but also because most workplaces are dynamic, most roles do evolve, and there is an expectation that employees evolve with the role and with the business. So where there is changing roles or where there is, growth in the business, you I suppose should adopt quite simply the same principles that apply to a probationary period to help set employees up for success, but also help to reduce the risk for the business. So that means resetting expectations. This is the case even for experienced employees. Doing things like updating position descriptions, performance indicators and objectives, doing it early and documenting it. Identifying any training and support needs is important. Regular and I think constructive feedback is useful. Ensuring that these things are aligned to the operational goals and organisational goals is really critical. And then documenting progress. I think from a legal perspective, structured performance management during a role change or where there's role growth helps to demonstrate that the expectations of the employer were clear, that there was a fair opportunity to perform in that role, and that any later decisions about the employee's suitability and success in that new role are evidence-based. We've all heard that refrain that I was doing well there, I was moved, and I was set up for failure. I was not set up to succeed. And so by sort of revisiting this performance approach and sort of aligning it in a sense to those similar principles that apply early in the employment, you really do support those later legal issues that might arise. There's to add that just from a business point of view, it's also going to maximise the likelihood that that change or that role growth is going to deliver the intended benefits, whether that's more efficiency, better leadership, better team outcomes. That's really important.
Yeah, it is actually important to re-emphasize that as well. I know when we're talking a lot about compliance, these things also have productivity benefits as well. Usually the area of focus, we want to make sure we're setting somebody up for success. You can do both things at once. So we can set somebody up for success, but we can also provide the appropriate level of protection for the business as well. Okay, so end of employment. So sometimes things, they just can't be put right. So what are the considerations for if you're considering ending somebody's employment as a result of a performance issue?
Absolutely. I'd say that the end of the employment relationship is obviously the highest risk stage in employment for legal claims.
That's why the employment law experts always look nervous when you ask this question.
Yeah. And or the applicant lawyers sometimes rub their hands together when they come with an employee that's been dismissed, to shows them what process had been followed by the employer or lack thereof. I suppose we covered at the start quite a lot of the risks that are associated with performance management or lack of performance management, and why they should be considered, what should be considered a compliance issue. So I won't go over all of that ground, but I can rattle them off on my hands. There's risks of unfair dismissal, unlawful termination claims or general protections claims, discrimination, breach of contract, breach of policy, breach of industrial instrument claims. There's bullying, So there's a whole myriad of risks that might arise when you take the step to dismiss an employee for poor performance. And so it's in connection with those risks that performance management is your primary defense as a risk mitigation tool to support you through that process. Because if a claim is made or if an issue arises, it's what you're going to go to help establish that the performance concerns were really clear, they were documented, and they predated the decision to terminate, that the employee had genuine opportunities to respond and improve in response to those concerns, that if there was a policy or there was a commitment to do things in a particular way, that you did it in a particular way. And lastly, consistency. And this is really, really critical. You want to be able to show that you handled this particular dismissal or this particular example of poor performance in the same way that you've handled other examples in the business. This will be really important in the event that an employee alleges that they were targeted or that the approach you took with them was unfair or was based on some discriminatory or illegal reason. So I think in short, so poor absent management records are a gift to lawyers when someone is dismissed, but robust, fair and well-documented processes are the opposite. They're a critical risk mitigation strategy or tool, pardon me.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so before we jump into the demonstration part, which we're going to do shortly, just to wrap up what we've been talking about to this point, I just want to now get to, so actually this is a good segue to say a recording and a recap of this webinar will be available to everybody who attended after the session. So you'll be able to very quickly recap the points I'm about to talk through with Steve, which are kind of, if we're building a performance program, which is, targeted towards productivity benefits, as well as making sure that I'm keeping enough information about worker performance for compliance purposes. What are the elements of a bad performance program, just concisely, so that everybody can take these memories away with them, and if not, watch the recap.
Certainly. I think I'll just list them off rather than sort of explain them all in detail. First thing I've seen a lot of is no reviews at all. Big problem. The second thing is that performance reviews don't always relate to the tasks or activities that form the key features of the role, or they're only focused on one or two elements. So they're not encompassing what the true purpose of the role is.
Mm-hmm.
Another problem is that reviews are often irregular or rushed or not done at the right times. Another problem is that reviews are often subjective and not supported by evidence.
Mm-hmm.
It's common to see an absence of a link between review outcomes and actions. So documenting why performance doesn't align to a key role requirement and then what is going to be done about it is not always reflected in the documentation, even when it is looked at. And then finally, perhaps one of the biggest issues that I see is that there are often inconsistent standards between employees performing the same role, and it creates a lot of risk. That's what makes for a bad program. And I get to flip the script now and say, well, how can we create a good program, and how can a tool like Xemplo Performance help to facilitate that for employers?
Okay, so flip the script means it's back to me. Actually, this is a good segue. Let's jump into Xemplo, and we'll have a look at a lot of the tools that we have available to essentially address some of the things that Steve's just described. So if I jump in here, I'll just quickly start off with, so as I mentioned earlier in the call, we have just launched a new performance feature in Xemplo. But a lot of the things we're talking about here, they are, a lot of the things we're talking about here are, some of them are performance related, some of them are related to the position structure that you set up within Xemplo, and some of them are other features that will manifest in other places in the worker experience as well. So we're going to have a look at a combination of all of those things. So we won't focus just on performance. We'll have a look at the Xemplo tools holistically and how we can use all of them in conjunction to get a solid picture of somebody's role, the performance expectation in that role, and as well how we continually kind of get the conversations between key stakeholders in your business going so that you can assure you're measuring and tracking performance. So performance, here we have a depiction of the worker lifecycle as well as the tools that we have available in Xemplo currently. So if a lot of people on the call will be familiar with the Xemplo tools we have available. So performance has been added into the suite here. It is available in production now for any existing Xemplo customers, and it's included as part of the subscription that you have now. So you'll be able to follow the in-app prompts or the support material that's also available online to get set up. It's a pretty easy process to set up as well. So we will actually walk through that today, the 2 steps that you need to complete to get started with performance. But once you've completed those 2 steps, you can then essentially create your own cadence of different kinds of performance reviews that you expect to complete within your business. So performance available for everybody now.
Sorry,
and if I jump into,
Ray,
yes, go for it, Steve.
I
yes.
have to. I can't see your screen. I'm
You
not
can't
sure
see
if
my
that's something
screen?
that anybody else is experiencing.
Let me just maybe actually. Apologies, everybody, for that slight technical issue. I think
Perfect.
maybe I'm online now. Yes, there we go. Okay, so
We've
yes,
got
this
you.
is me talking about, yeah, we've got me. Thank you, Steve. I could have gone all the way through the demo and not known. Yeah, so this is the diagram that I was talking about before, the depiction of the life cycle as well as the tools that are available within Xemplo. New performance tool added in here. If you want to get started with it, available to everybody in their Xemplo environment now, so you'll be able to get this set up and start using performance reviews from now. Some of the features that we're going to have a look at today, they were available before this as well. So, for example, position descriptions, etc. So we'll have a look at all the different parts of performance management that Steve, we'll see how we go against the Steve scorecard for compliance. So if you want to get started as well, as I mentioned just before I was sharing my screen properly, there is some pretty comprehensive support documentation walking you through how to get set up. And as well, there is in-app guidance that will get you through all of the different or the two different steps. So there's only 2 steps that you need to complete before you're able to start sending out performance reviews for your team. Okay, so on that note, let's have a look at these 2 steps. So as I mentioned, in-app guidance, before it comes up at this question mark here, when you want to set up performance, if you look in here, there'll be a bunch of tips about how to get started with performance. I have actually set things up so I won't see too much of the in-app guidance, but I'll jump into the 2 things that need to be set up before you can start using the performance features. If we jump into company settings, so this will be available to anybody who has company administrator access in Xemplo. If I jump into the company settings here, I can see a new menu that's available for customers on 325 or later, so that's all customers now, I think. Performance, and this is going to show me basically one of the foundation or the building blocks of performance here, and this is what's called a review type. So one of the things we didn't want to introduce with Xemplo was a lot of administrative overhead to create different kinds of performance reviews for different roles in your business. What a review type does is it will automatically create performance reviews based on some settings that you put into each of these reviews. Now we can create an unlimited number of different types of review, and this basically reflects the different kinds of performance monitoring you do across your performance program. And this set of performance review types actually, this will come in the box. So when you turn on performance, you'll see these review types are available immediately. You can reconfigure these, or you can add additional ones, or get rid of the ones of these that you wouldn't be using, for example. What does a performance review type do? Steve, yes.
I was about to say, Ray, could you just zoom in on those review types slightly?
Sure.
Please? I can't see.
Are you? Is that better?
That's much better.
Okay.
My eyes are aging.
Well, in case there are more people on the call with the same issue, I will stay zoomed in. So what I have here is I have our list of review types. If I look at one of these review types here, I'll see some information about the type of review that it is. I can give it a name. I can provide instructions that will be shown to users when they complete performance review as well. And then this is where we're essentially doing the automatically populating a performance review based on somebody's role. So this is going to your point about consistency before, Steve. We want to make sure that when we create a performance review, that the method that we use to create performance reviews is consistent across everybody. So in this case, when I create a performance review of this type for anybody in the business, we're using the exact same methodology to do it. We are going to include a section in the review that is about the individual's responsibilities, and these are drawn from their position record. So in the position record, we have responsibilities. We will be evaluating the worker on those. Skills, likewise, from a position, we can set up a list of skills that somebody in this role should have. During the performance review of this type, we're going to be evaluating somebody against the skills list in their position. And for this particular review type as well, I get to indicate whether or not I want it to include a self-evaluation. So Self-evaluation is the worker will be providing their own documented feedback into the review. So you don't have to turn this on depending on the kind of review that it is. For example, if it was something that was more improvement related, you maybe wouldn't have somebody provide their own feedback. Whereas if it was sort of a formal periodic review, for example, you potentially would get feedback from the individual who's being reviewed, as well as whoever is the nominated reviewer. If I turn this on, there'll be a couple of other settings that I have available here as well. These are setting visibility of different parts of the performance review. So I am going to allow a reviewer to see a worker's responses in real time. Likewise, I'm going to allow a worker to see the reviewer's responses in real time. This is again something that you have flexibility to configure this to what you think best fits your own organization. And then the last one here, again, requires somebody from HR to finalize. If we're talking about, you can set up a performance program that includes both informal and formal discussion points. And for some of those, the more formal ones, for example, you might want somebody from your HR team to review that before you would consider that to be finalized. So you can add that step in here as well. And yeah, as I mentioned before, you can set up as many different review types as you like. So the next thing we're going to have a look at just quickly is position setup, and then we'll have a look at how we use these review types. So to have a look at positions, I'm going to jump into our HR menu here, and I'm going to load up positions. So for anyone who's not familiar with how positions work in Xemplo, a position is essentially the definition of a particular role within our business. So I can build out an organization structure here of different kinds of roles. A position is going to define the compliance requirements for this role. So things like the credentials that somebody is expected to have in a role, the policies they should read, the training they should do. In addition to that, I'll open one of these roles that we have available here. What I can also see on a position is the PD. So what we've got on the left-hand side here is essentially the information that goes into the position description for this role. How is a position description created in Xemplo used? When you're hiring for this role, if you use Xemplo Hire, for example, you can carry this information about the position into the job advertisement. So you can put the position summary as well as the responsibilities and skills into your job ad. And they're also used in performance as well. So you're able to create a position description here. Actually, another thing I'll point out here as well is the employee can also see this position description at any time as well in their employee portal. So when you log in as an employee, you would be able to see the position that you're in as well as the PD related to this. We're shortly making an enhancement actually to make it optionally available to workers as part of the contract signing process. When you're onboarding, if you're signing a contract, you would then see the PD associated, the auto-generated PD from Xemplo associated with that role when you're signing your contract. So we have our summary of the position, and then we have a list of responsibilities that somebody in this role is going to be assuming, as well as the skills here. So when we say in a review that I'm evaluating somebody against the responsibilities and skills of their role, this is what we're talking about here. So there isn't a requirement to set up a performance review and add all of the different pieces that you want to evaluate manually, because that can lead to inconsistency across reviews. What we're essentially doing is we're using the exact same methodology to set up a position description for all of the different roles in my business. And then when we create a performance review, we're drawing the content of the performance review from that position description. So you're able to establish, if you need to, that you have a clear method for creating performance reviews that ensures that they are consistent across your entire team and you're using the same review methodology for everybody. So this is how we set up a position. As I mentioned before, we have some things coming soon to more to show position descriptions in different places across the system. You can already see that when you're logged in as a worker, as well as you will shortly be able to see that in onboarding as well. We can use these in hire and we use them in performance. So those two things that I just did there, setting up review types, as well as reviewing all of the positions in my organization structure just to make sure that the responsibilities and skills are what I would expect them to be. Those are the only two things I need to do before I can actually start using performance to create performance reviews. So to create performance reviews, I'm going to go to the performance menu here, and I'm going to select new review. Now this is going to load up a screen where I can select workers for whom I want to create a review. keeping in mind here that there are some other tools here that we can use to send reminders across the business as well. So things like Xemplo tasks. For people in their probationary period, you can use checklists, so new starter checklists, which are all another feature of Xemplo that are available to everybody as well. That's essentially the ability to set key dates based on somebody's commencement date, and send reminders to key people across your business when somebody's about to hit those dates. So for example, if somebody's just started, you would be able to set up a checklist that says 30 days, 60 days, 90 days after commencement, I want to notify this person that they need to do a performance review, or they need to send a performance review to the worker to complete. So in this screen, I'm able to select by position, site, or department the workers for whom I want to create a performance review. I can select all of the workers in my business from this screen as well. And if I basically I'll pick one of the individuals here, one of the things you'll notice here is because we're auto-creating performance reviews, there is some information that is required to be available for a worker, or we won't be able to create the reviews. One of them is that they have to be in a positions, because that's where we're drawing all the content from. So some of the workers who aren't in positions, we wouldn't be able to create a performance review for them. And then just a couple of pieces of data that I need here. I'm going to put in the dates for the performance review. So we'll say that this is a quarterly performance review, for example. So I'm going to say it's from August to November. And then the last piece is the type of review that this is. So let's go for it's a quarterly performance review. And this is going to populate, just as an FYI for me, before I create the reviews, the areas that are included in this review. So we're evaluating responsibilities, we're evaluating skills as well, and there is a self-evaluation. So the individual is going to be prompted to complete this performance review, as well as the person who's been assigned as a reviewer. And regarding reviewer, we can derive automatically the reviewer associated with this performance review from the organization structure, so direct manager, or it can be somebody else as well. So you can nominate another person to complete this review as well. But at this point, I've got all the information that I need here, and I'm going to select create. And this is going to create the performance review that I've requested and add it to our performance dashboard here. Anybody involved in the performance process would receive a notification to complete that performance review. They would also receive reminders until that's done as well. You get to configure the cadence of the reminders, etc. as well. In terms of what a performance review looks like, I have a couple that need my completion here already. So if I select complete here, this is going to take me into the performance review experience. So this is what both a reviewer, I'm actually acting as a reviewer now, and the employee themselves is going to see available from any kind of device. So I can complete this from a desktop. I can complete my performance review on my phone if I wanted to as well. We can see here at the side the different sections that were included. So responsibilities, skills. For each of the responsibilities and skills, I have the ability to provide a rating. We use a standard 4-point rating system in Xemplo. This helps us to avoid things like centrality bias, for example, so we don't use a rating out of 5. For this one, I'm going to say that the individual meets expectations, and I'm able to leave a comment here as well. So this is getting into, we have a consistent rating methodology that's used across all of the business, as well as I've given opportunity for both the reviewer and the individual themselves to provide commentary that is kept in the worker's file ongoing as well. So we're keeping this documentation linked to the worker, and we have all of the discussion that's essentially had and been documented in this review. Okay, so I can see my own comments as a reviewer. This one has been set up so I cannot see the other person's comments, but as I mentioned before, you don't have to set it up that way, and I can go through and complete each of these, at which point this section would be marked completed. Once a review is actually completed, if I just jump into one that I've done earlier, we go to looking at one that's complete. I can, at the conclusion of a once both participants in this review have submitted their performance data for the review, we'll get an automatically calculated score as well. So the purple line is the score that came from the reviewer, and the grey line is from the individual themselves. So I can see here my overall performance score is 2.3. And this little percentage bar here, this is the first time we've done a performance review for this individual, but this will actually also provide you with a comparison to the last review as well, so you can see what how their performance is trending over time. Okay, so that's what Xemplo performance looks like now. Our aim with the initial version of Xemplo performance was to deliver essentially the framework that will allow you to start collating and tracking feedback for a team. There are additional features that are coming shortly, so I'll just mention a couple of them quickly here as well. So goals, so we are including in a future edition of performance the ability to set goals. This will allow you to set on a worker profile customized goals for that particular individual in addition to their role specific attributes. Tasks, so this is coming in the very near future actually, is the ability to, as Steve mentioned before, there will be tasks that fall out of a performance review. So these can be things like training that need to be completed, for example, or follow up on the job tasks that need to be completed by the individual, by somebody else in your team, by the manager, for example. So the task function will allow you to keep all of these in one place. So I can basically say, here are all of the tasks that are linked to this performance review, and I wouldn't consider this review activity to be completed until these tasks are done as well. Results. So we had a look at results just then at the conclusion of a performance review. They're pretty simplistic at the moment. We are actually injecting some additional visualizations of results as well, so you can start seeing how this person compares against other people in the same role and other employees within your business as well. So those are a few of the additional features that we're planning on including in performance over the next 12 months. In addition to that, are custom questions. So it's another reality of performance review that even though we're trying to reduce administration by automating as much as possible, there will be custom pieces of information that you need to track. Enhanced position descriptions, so separating out things like hiring criteria from responsibilities and skills so that you're not evaluating somebody on things that are essentially point in time criteria that help you to hire the right person for the role. And yeah, so that's essentially what the path ahead for performance looks like. As I mentioned before, performance is already available to everybody who is using Xemplo. So you'd be able to follow essentially the in-app prompts to get it started. And so at this point, Steve, I'll come back to do the check. Did we address all of the requirements of an effective performance program? Please say yes.
I think we have. It's fantastic, and I think there's four key points that you can take out of it. The first is that it's going to be done. You won't actually forget to do reviews. They will be done. The second is it's going to be relevant, and that's because of the work you've done to tie the performance review to the actual position, responsibilities and skills. The third is it will be consistent. You might still get accused of bias, but the reality is that for all positions that are set up in that way, the review process will be able to be set and conducted in that manner. And then finally, and everything always comes back to proof in disputes, you're going to have the record of it. So with each of those four features, I think Xemplo has absolutely nailed it with this performance tool.
Thank you. That's the vote we need. Actually, one of the things that I didn't, on the subject of record keeping, it was one of the things I didn't mention during the demonstration. All of the review activity that we had just had a look at there, and the PDs as well, those are all, of course, downloadable too. So if you do need to, for whatever reason, keep a copy of them somewhere else, you're able to do that as well. So that actually brings us to the end of our webinar today. I want to thank again everybody for attending. We do have a couple of questions that have been added to the Q&A, so I'll address those now with Steve. Actually, there might be a couple of them for me. So one of the questions is about whether performance is available. So yes, actually, so just to reiterate that, that we mentioned a couple of times, it is available to everybody in production now. So you can set that up and start using it as part of your existing subscription. There's nothing else that you need to activate. What else have we got here in questions? Is about if I don't have yes, if you don't have responsibilities and skills set up in positions now, you don't have to create new positions. So you can go in there and update the positions that you have as well. You can also duplicate positions. So somebody's asked me here about if there's a quick way of creating responsibilities and skills across a lot of positions. Once you've created them in one, you can duplicate a position. So you would be able to essentially create like a role profile and then use it for other roles as well. Okay, so I think that's it for our Q&A questions, and we're nearly at time. So thank you again, everybody, for attending. I want to give a big thank you to Steve for all of your insights. So it has been very valuable for me, and I'm sure everybody else on the call, to understand the compliance parts of performance, which I think quite often take a bit of a backseat to some of the productivity goals that are generally linked to different kinds of performance features and tools. So it's great to see and consider both of them side by side. So yeah, key takeaways from today: performance management, reducing compliance risk. Thank you, Steve, for explaining that to us, and how we can streamline record reviews and record keeping in Xemplo. If there are any questions after the session about them, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Recap available shortly, and thank you everybody for attending. See you at the next one.